My head wants to go two ways here. Try not to do that unless it's essential. So thank you all for being here. My purpose is to give you sort of a bit of a peek as to where we are with our normal every 4-year update to our metropolitan transportation planning process, so that you can understand how better this process folds into that. As I'm sure you've heard, or maybe Joe hasn't let you in on this in other meetings, the calendar for our regular 4-year update is not just perfectly aligned with the calendar for this project. It'll work, but we slowed down our MTP calendar by about 4 months in order to maximize the opportunity for this project to impact this version of our plan. But some of the learnings that come out of this project, just because that calendar can't slow down anymore, will start to get integrated the day after we adopt this 4-year update and go to work on the next 4-year update. So it's important for everybody to understand that. This all does eventually fold together, but not all of it will happen during this current plan cycle. So I just want to give you a little bit of a peek at where we are with the SACOG board in terms of getting a draft preferred scenario endorsed by the board, acted on, and we expect that to happen in June, and then it will be a full clear until April of next year before it's final. So there is still plenty of opportunity to impact it during that time period. So many of you went to the workshops that we did in the fall on the update to the MTP, and in those workshops we actually had 3 scenarios on the table. Scenario 1, which didn't fit on this screen, is basically our currently adopted MTP, minus some growth reduction by 2035, because we're, of course, now in a slower economy than we were when we did that before. Scenario 2, from the land use side, is roughly equivalent to the blueprint growth strategy, the 50-year growth strategy that the SACOG board adopted a little over 6 years ago now. And then the theme of Scenario 3, and the board was very directive about this, was to really push the envelope on transit-oriented development and transit service to see what it would take in this region to really get a higher performing transit system than we have now. So what you have here are the very preliminary, this should be like draft of a draft of a preferred scenario. This is staff work right now. It's not acted on by the board. We're still interacting with land use and public works staff. So on the investment side, you can sort of read those numbers for yourself in terms of where the dollars are going. This is about $35 billion worth of money from a variety of sources through 2035. These may not look like big differences between these scenarios in the draft to you, but you know, $1 billion here, $1 billion there does make a difference in terms of how many bike lanes you can build, how many buses you can run. What we're doing, by the way, is building a preferred scenario that is starting with Scenario 3, but sort of trending towards Scenario 2 where it's necessary to be realistic and practical and do what we can actually build. Scenario 3 was a very visionary scenario, and we're under federal and state rules that require us to be also feet on the ground as well as eye to the future when we adopt our plan. So that's roughly what we're doing here. In terms of land use, you can see that there's more development going into what we called centers and corridors in the workshop. And if I had Scenario 1, which was the current MTP on here, it's an even lower number than Scenario 2. So I think we're going to have a pretty big jump in the amount of new housing and jobs in these centers and corridors. Those are not perfect matches for transit priority areas, but a lot of the transit priority areas are in the centers and corridors. They're like a subset. There are some in other areas, but largely they're in these centers and corridors. This is a metric from a transportation planning agency standpoint we probably pay more attention to than any other metric over the last several years, which is just trying to reduce the amount of vehicle trips, the mileage and how much time we spend in our automobile. And as you can see, this number is getting better compared to what it is today, and we've actually have the draft preferred outperforming scenario 3 in that regard. At the staff level, anyway, we're very happy about that. That number correlates very closely to air pollution emissions, global warming gases, greenhouse emissions, etc. On the other hand, you have congestion in the region, and we have a way that we define heavy congestion. It's the kind of congestion that makes you really frustrated when you're in the middle of it. You know it when you're in it, okay? I'll just leave it at that. And so this we also are measuring on a per person basis, so people can sort of relate to it at an individual level. And only 5% of the travel, and this is travel in an automobile, will be in heavy congestion under this draft scenario by 2035. And that's actually a lower number than today by a little bit. And so we're actually improving the overall flow and mobility in the system at the same time that we're reducing the length of the car trips that are still in the system. And then, and I think this may be the last slide, the one big new piece of what we're doing this go-round is the new State Regional Planning Law, Senate Bill 375. For the first time, the State Air Resources Board gives us a target, a per capita target for how much we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions for passenger travel, basically, and from 2005 is what that is targeted at. And again, we're showing about a 17% reduction in the draft preferred, which was as well as we had done in scenario 3, which was the highest performing scenario in our workshop. So again, at the staff side, we're feeling really good about that. We'll keep working on it. We may get that number even a little bit better by the time we get to the final, but it is above the number that we were given by the state to hit. So lots of good things flow from that if we can have a plan that actually meets or beats the state target. A lot of good things we think financially and for the environment obviously come from that. This gives a little more detail on where the growth is, and we have the region, looks like we're missing, someone help me here, who's here on the land use side? We divided the region into 4 types of communities, only 3 of which are shown on this slide. Centers and corridors, which are kind of proxies for the transit priority areas. Developing communities, which is sort of a code word for new greenfield growth, largely adjacent to existing urban areas. There's also existing communities, and those are sort of classic infill areas. They're not on this slide, but that's sort of usually the scattered infill. Might not be right in a corridor, but it's still within the current urban development fabric. And then rural residential are the, you know what that is. So you can see how the proportion of growth is changing between these scenarios. And this is important because the travel performance within these centers and corridors in particular is much better than in either of the other 3 community types. Much lower numbers of vehicle miles traveled, much higher levels of transit ridership, etc. So it's important wherever practical that we maximize those opportunities. We also look a lot at the types of structures that are being built. And this is a good example to talk to a little bit in terms of this whole project. We've worked hard to match the types of housing that is built to the preferences of the people in the region, what kind of housing they tell us they're going to want to live in when they move again, either rental or own. And we do lots of market surveys on that and try to stay very grounded. But one of the things that we're going to be a lot smarter about when we're done with this project also is not just matching people's incomes to what the typical rents are for these products and what the typical sales prices of the homes are, to make sure we're doing everything we can to make it affordable for people to own and rent housing. But we're also going to be doing a lot more detailed work on the term we're using as jobs housing fit.